Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Shortcut. I'm Jack, and this is Greg. What's up, Greg?
And I'm Greg. Yeah. No, nice to be back. Even though we're at the end of the year, I think you and I are sitting on like a ton of ideas that we still want to talk about. So we're riding it out to the end of the year. And back with
It's funny that video doesn't just die in 2023. I think it might keep happening.
We got one thing right this year, and it was that you will see videos in 2024. Really high bar. But no, honestly excited to kind of actually come back to something that while I was out, I guess that's really deep into the Greg lore. I was out for a trip in Japan, and you guys carried the flag with some really great episodes. And you spoke with Lauren from our product team. And I know this because Lauren has kind of given some internal presentations on these ideas, but I really loved your guys' convo about, actually being on camera and like appearing on camera as one of the major fears that people have. And one of the things that I think surprisingly is not a top shelf word for this situation, but surprisingly, like that's what's holding back professional marketers from producing more video, actually just getting on the camera and being scared to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, at a certain level, you need to like experience ego death to be like completely comfortable on camera. And like, unfortunately, that's just not going to happen for most people. So the other end of the spectrum is preparing well and making sure that you feel at least confident enough to hop on the camera. And so, yeah, today we're going to tell you guys or share with you guys at least our opinions on what helps you guys look your best, act your best, sound your best, just to create a video that you're proud of. I think the issue a lot of people run into when they're first starting making videos is that the video that they end up with, either prior or even post editing it, they just feel like down in the dumps because it's not the video they envision in their head. And I think today, hopefully we can help you, with some tips that will get you closer to that video that you are really excited to make.
Yeah. And I will like get into this in more detail later in the episode, but I can like absolutely relate to this feeling from the jump, because I come from a much longer background in writing, where what people saw of my face for years and years as we built up these like kind of parasocial relationships was like a single avatar that I had picked, from the company headshots that we did or something and used forever and ever. And like, if you followed my writing, like that's maybe all you would have seen of me. And I was much more comfortable with like how much control, I guess it feels like there is in writing. You can pick every word. You're never really sort of like caught off guard. And so I think transitioning to video, like I definitely had that feeling. It was less so maybe just like personally appearing on camera or being afraid of like watching the footage back. It was more so just like, I don't want to look, I don't want to sort of get caught off guard with a question, or I don't want to just like come across as foolish, like rambling on camera. So I really felt that, like I really felt that fear. And I think like one of the things you really helped me with was, looking at it from kind of like, there's a lot of Pareto principle stuff like out there. Like people have kind of probably heard of the Pareto principle, but if you haven't, quickly, it's like there's usually a small number of things you can do that make the most difference. And then it's like the real, long time pros that get into that like edge case stuff, like the last 10% where they're adding like insane levels of polish and so on and so on.
Yeah.
But for most activities, there's a small set of stuff that if you get this right, you're immediately kind of ahead of the curve, and you probably immediately feel better about what you're doing. So
yeah,
your feedback on like the audio video stuff that made the most difference probably made the most difference for me. It was like the most helpful support I've gotten.
Well, I'm honored.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Unless I show up on camera somewhere and fumble through it, then Jack's like, no, he's no student of mine. I don't.
Yeah, you just freeze today. Yeah, no, I think like you're saying, yeah, there's a lot of people get caught up in thinking like, oh, I can only either use like my MacBook camera and my MacBook mic, or you suddenly need to be spending thousands of dollars. And it's just like not really true. You can really get away with like a pretty budget friendly video and audio situation. And even just that like extra effort can take you like almost all the way there of like almost feeling completely professional. So I think we will discuss that today. And yeah, I think number one, like sort of what we've been getting at is I think probably the most important thing, as you can probably tell by both of our microphones that are sticking into the video slightly,
Yeah.
is the audio. I think a lot of people immediately want to up their video first thing, but I actually would say don't do that. Audio is way more important. I think investing in audio makes you sound obviously it makes you sound better, but it makes you sound more professional. It makes people wait and listen. If you're scrolling through a bunch of videos and suddenly someone has amazing audio, you can hear that difference compared to like AirPod audio. And where like the difference between a iPhone camera to like a DSLR isn't as big. And so I think like audio, start thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think two great points there is like, number one, bad audio is much harder to like stomach as an end user. Like this is true in all content formats, but like every reader watcher is willing to put up with some level of like, I don't like this, whether it's like the way you formatted text on the webpage to the video recording itself or the surroundings. But audio is up there with one of the things that I think people are like they will most immediately abandon something if they have to sit through really terrible audio. It's grating. Versus like not being able to see you super clearly, or the lighting's kind of funky. Half the time I feel like with a lot of content, people are kind of in and out of, I'm doing this and also doing something in the background. So I'm getting a little bit of audio, and then sometimes I refocus and actually watch the video. I certainly do that. So if you're in my ear, kind of like clipping the mic and just coming through like, really terribly and grainy, like that's a non-negotiable for a lot of people. And I think the other thing is to maybe remember is like, not a lot of defaults come with great audio. Like you kind of said, default video is crazy good. It's wildly good right now, but default audio still leaves a lot to be desired. So as soon as you add that like dedicated mic, or just get something clear or crisp near your face while you're talking, makes such a big difference.
Yeah, completely. I think a lot of people think that because they're using a somewhat expensive device that's not necessarily made for audio, that like it will be good. Like your phone audio is fine. It's not amazing. Or like your AirPod audio is really terrible. I'm just going to say it. Like, honestly, even your MacBook microphone, which is also pretty bad, I think is often better than AirPod audio. And like a lot of people don't even know that. And so I think like, don't rely on really any tech that has a built-in audio situation. It's even better just to spend $20 on Amazon getting like a really, really cheap lav mic. You can look back even on Kapwing's videos from like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago or so. I was using a lav mic in every single one of our videos on our channel, and it sounds fine. And it was literally $15. Like, it's it's well worth it to put in a small amount of money. And then now I use this microphone, which is significantly more expensive. It's probably like $400, but I'll never need another microphone ever again. It's like top of the line. And then obviously there's a lot of like middle ground. There's like, Blue Yetis and things like that, which are pretty good and sort of live in the middle between the cheapo mics and like the Shure microphones. But also like I understand that not everyone's going to be able to buy this, and so I also wanted to mention that like if you can't, for some reason, if you can't spend $20 to even get a lav mic or something like that, just spending extra time in post production, like working on audio, using some new audio tools can be really, really, really helpful. There's all kinds of new audio tools that are really amazing, where you can put in like, a piece of audio that's like not really great, and it'll process it, and out will come a much, much more appealing, enhanced voice. I'm thinking about like Kapwing's clean audio feature. I'm thinking about Adobe's voice enhanced feature. There's like all sorts of new tech that's coming out that like you can put in pretty bad audio and get out pretty good audio. It's not a fix all. There's still going to be some funky moments in it. But even if you can't get a great microphone, spend some time just looking at how you can increase the quality. Because in the end, audio, especially for like something long form like this, no one's going to stick around for more than a couple minutes if your audio subpar.
Yes. And I mean, I've experienced personally with like, we're a startup, so we do this show like when we have the time to do it, wherever we're at. And I've been in situations like being on site at the office where I didn't have my setup, and I was sort of worried, like, now that I have my setup where I wanted, is this going to come across as like wildly different and worse if I have to use this like makeshift mic? And I think, as we found, like it really doesn't. Like it's nice to have the higher end gear that you can really trust and rely on to sound like perfect, or as best as you can get it, for if you're doing this kind of stuff like all the time. But you can go so far with a simple USB mic that you lean into the reviews, you see demos of it on YouTube. I'm sure that there are some somewhere for almost every product. You can get like leagues better audio just by buying something simple. So I've even had moments of like, I have to downgrade my fancy setup. And
this is what we were using.
Yes.
At the office. Yeah, exactly. $40. Like,
exactly.
It's doable if you. And it wasn't a perfect microphone, but 4.5 rating. And that's probably what I would give it. I'd probably give it like a 4 out of 5. You can look on, Amazon, and there are a bunch of lav mics. Like, there's tons of options. You don't have to go for the super expensive one. And it is well worth it, even just to get a cheap one. So I would definitely recommend that.
100% agree.
Yeah, the next thing I think we wanted to talk about is just camera gear, I think, as well. I think we, touched on this a little in the beginning, or at least I did, and I said, don't worry so much about camera gear. Worry about audio, and I stand by it, and here's why. If you look back in, I think even the last episode that we did, I was using something called continuity camera, which is your iPhone that automatically connects via Bluetooth to your computer, and you can use it as a camera, and it's really pretty good. There's not a huge difference anymore between, especially continuity camera, which uses the back camera, which is better than the front, than like that and this. And in fact, if you want to know a little secret, I actually believe that this camera I'm using right now technically is only 720p, because the hardwire, like the USB thing, can't take in 1080 on this camera, and so this actually might be better than this. So you've got like the most amazing camera literally in your fingertips all the time.
Yes. And I once again can add like probably a pretty embarrassing story here, but like Jack can confirm that it is true. Of like, I wanted to get the video set up to a certain place, and I ended up, really not understanding what I was getting into. I can kind of just turn it on and it's like ready to go, but I did not realize kind of like what I needed exactly. So I ended up with this like pretty nice camera, but not like the supporting things that I needed. I didn't have this to plug into that. I mean, every MacBook owner has complained about the number of dongles that you end up with. Like still the case for me. But let alone just like getting it all sort of like set up correctly. And we ended up with 2 episodes where I had to use this Logitech webcam from ages ago. I mean, I think the date on it is like 2014, right? Just because I kicked back like getting my final setup ready. Meanwhile, I could have bought an iPhone stand, used
Yeah.
continuity camera, and I would have looked way better, for 2 weeks running. So,
Yeah.
uh, there are instances of that kind of procrastination that are like way sneakier too, where you just like in the back of your mind, you're just like, no, I'll do it once I get it all, perfect and like truly
Right.
set up. And it's like, no, just honestly, basic mic, start with your phone. Don't give yourself the excuse of like building up this collection of gear. It's actually, I think, a great challenge when you're working with like kind of a minimal setup too, because then the content really, it has to be good. It has to be kind of like
Yeah.
insightful or entertaining, because you can't lean into just like, oh, we're going to wow with production values here. I mean, that's every podcast. Most podcasts don't have, the level of fidelity that's like, we're just going to impress literally on the visual display happening here. So that's a format that'll definitely force your hand on that. But generally, like, it's so easy to get caught up in like, not until I've got it perfect. And I just want to warn everybody against that. I mean, I easily could have been in a place where I was like 90% of the way there in terms of like my recording setup. And I just kept kicking it back because I thought I had to have the perfect set of gear. And I of course was like wildly out of my league when I bought it. So it took me weeks to like
Yeah.
learn it too. So
Yeah. I think it's also a good like case to just have a small tripod for your phone anyway, like just in case, because tech is
yeah.
always effing up. And like, yeah, just having your phone as a backup option is a great tool. It's definitely good enough. And it's way better than what you should never, ever, 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 ever use ever, which is your MacBook. I
Yeah.
really think MacBook internal camera quality is like truly the bottom of the barrel. It's just so bad. And
Yeah.
there's, way better and cheaper. I guess not cheaper. You might have to put in, $10 for a phone
Extra.
tripod.
Yeah.
But well worth it to avoid that type of quality, because that just is not good enough. We're talking about good enough. iPhone's good enough. What is not good enough is your MacBook. Don't do it.
Yeah. It often comes too with like, it being if you're using like a work laptop, like a lot of people, usually comes with other issues of like people are going to set it up on the desk. So it's not like eye height. It's definitely not at the right position. Usually you're not thinking about lighting with something like a built-in camera. It just is not something that really, you're not connecting the dots versus like you're going to get out your iPhone, you're going to get out your camera on a stand, and you're immediately like, well, where's the best like natural light I can kind of grab from here,
true.
right? So I think like using it, like relying on it, is definitely a last resort thing. Like totally, like obviously totally fine for internal meetings and all of that stuff. But anything you're going to publish, that little extra effort really makes a difference if your default is the Mac camera. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yep. I have beef with the MacBook camera.
I can tell. There's a history here. Yeah.
And after that, I think, as you started to talk about, is lighting. Lighting is quite important, but it's also one of the easiest things. My go-to always have been, always will be, is natural lighting. Don't try to overcomplicate things. Just sit in front of a window and don't record when it's dark outside, and don't record when it's like golden hour and directly on your face. And other than that, you are going to be great. You might need to supplement with like a cheap ring light. That never hurt anyone, but you can get those for like $15 on Amazon as well. But I don't think that like every person needs to have a 3-point or 4-point softbox light setup, studio grade lighting situation. As long as you're just getting enough, then it's good enough.
Yeah. And I agree with you on like not only when you're recording personally, but when we've done the rare sort of like studio style shoot, which is usually just like us renting out a small space, often with our co-founder and CEO Julia, to kind of like work with her on her video. Like beforehand, we're looking at like great big windows. If they're floor to ceiling, that's even better. If they're just like is an area where there's a lot of natural light, like we take that into consideration. I mean, maybe a bit advanced for people who are not even thinking like about grabbing a little studio, but natural light is a huge consideration in terms of like how we record. And sorry, night owls, but Jack is right. Like I have tried to make 5 p.m. recordings work for me in the wintertime, and it is rough. Like it either comes across as like I look like I'm streaming for Twitch for like a gaming setup, which is like fine for that context. Like it doesn't look the best for like a business or a marketing video, right? But there's worse. Like sometimes I don't even get that effect, and it just really comes across as like a harsh kind of lighting on the side of your face. You feel like you're drifting off into the background. So if you already have pause about video on because of like the production side of it, trying to make it work at night is just going to add like so much stress to your life. It's just much better to pick a great time of day where you're getting natural light either in the office or in your room, and try to organize a lot of your recordings around that. That's why we do our recordings in the afternoon East Coast time, because that's what works the best, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we got to give a little bit of slack. There's going to be times where you need to record at night, or like when the sun is fading. That's why I think having one or two like really cheap ring lights, or one great ring light if you can afford it, is worth it. Because what never works well are like trying to make lamps in your room work as like a softbox, or trying to like point lamps at you when you're trying to record. Just save yourself the stress and hassle. It's not worth it. Just buy a little one just in case for when you need it, and you'll be all right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, not lastly. So fourth, I think this is more of a confidence tip when you're going in. That's really important to remember, as to not be so hard on yourself, is that you are in control of everything, especially with editing. If you know how to edit reasonably well, and do editing basics like adding overlays or adding B-roll, or doing zoom jump cuts or things like that, you will have a better video. Because, I think a lot of people step into video and they think that they need to have everything memorized. And if they, need to take a moment to read the script or something like that, they get frustrated. They feel like it's not going to feel natural, and it's going to sound just strange putting together different audio snippets and things like that. But like a lot of this is so easily hidden. Like I said, you can add title cards, you can do zoom jump cuts, and then the clip of you sitting in the same spot and then going like, doesn't feel so weird if you're like also moving the camera a little bit. Adding overlays and movement and B-roll and things like that like can really hide a lot of the cuts. And so I think like a lot of people are actually too hard on themselves when recording. For instance, I mentioned this last episode, but like when I'm recording a scripted video, I almost never, it's just not a skill of mine, can read more than one sentence in a row and memorize more than one sentence in a row. Like I'm not, reading paragraphs off at a time. And, obviously you can tell sometimes, but I still think it feels pretty natural watching it back, because there is movement, there are elements on screen that are changing. And so I think that's important to note as well, as you don't have to be like, have a teleprompter and be perfectly saying your lines like an actor.
Yes. And I want to draw another parallel that I've noticed here with writing, because I know, you know, we've heard firsthand too, like a lot of content marketing folks, like they come from more of like a editorial, like a writing background. So if this is useful for people, I learned, like, as I got stronger as a writer over time, I was spending less time on sort of what you might call the equivalent of like a rough cut, like basically that first draft. Um, because I knew, I kind of found through experience, like my style is to sort of think through the idea a little bit beforehand. And then when I sit down, I'm still definitely not done. That the first draft never comes out in one take, far, far from it. But I end up kind of getting closer and closer of like my first drafts got stronger over time. I had to do a little bit less editing, I felt like. And I think you will feel that as you get more experience with video, but you need to remember that like the recording is it's that rough draft.
Yeah.
Nobody, no matter how experienced they are, just flips on the camera and records a video in one take of any kind of meaningful length. You sort of like, you actually assemble the take by taking segments that are really good and clear and crisp, where you don't fumble your words, or where you kind of get the point across the way that you want it to, and then you stitch it together. And so it might look like a lot of these folks that are great on camera are sort of just like, flip it on, let's record for 30 minutes and I don't miss a single line. But it's like, it really can't be further from the truth. And I don't think a lot of people assume that, but I think you can kind of feel that pressure when you finally get on camera and you've got this lens pointing to you, you've got the mic, maybe you have some lights, maybe in the case, and I give Julie a lot of credit here, like you've got your teammates there sitting in the room with you, like, okay, boss, let's hit it.
Yeah.
Like there's a weird different pressure. It's definitely something that can cause you to feel like, oh, I've got to nail all of these takes in one shot. But if you just get into that like first draft mode of like, I'm trying to put a good video together based on segments that I absolutely nail, not trying to do this like magical one take that even really experienced people cannot do, right?
Yeah.
So I think that really was the big eye-opening thing for me in terms of like post-production editing, is like, we're going to assemble this video. We're not going to, nail it in one take and then just add like little tiny bits of polish later,
Yeah, absolutely. Like never has that ever happened to me. And I've been doing this
Yeah.
for over a decade. And there are still times that are like frustrating sometimes, where I have like a specific script that I'm really trying to stick to. For, things like product marketing videos or something, where I really want to nail certain lines and that are really difficult. And like I'll look back in the editing process, or at my recording, and I'll literally be sat there like, ugh, like, why can't I do this? Like, I've taken this take a dozen times, but in the end, once you get like one good one, no one will ever know.
Yes.
As long as you can not be like weighed down by that stress of like not saying it perfectly and just let it go,
Yes.
then it's fine.
Yes. And it like, when you finally get into the mix, it makes total sense, because you're like, at first you're kind of like, why isn't, like, we scripted this, maybe like, why isn't this working? And then you realize that actually no, like the final video product has to be you delivering in the right cadence, like hitting the right tones and the right words where you feel like it's appropriate, transitioning from one idea to the next. Like, there's so much that goes into it beyond the script. It's great to nail a script for something that you want to be like nice and tight and not more freeform like a podcast, but you've only just begun. Like, your drafting stage is like kind of still underway, because you now have to show up and like draft the video, so to speak, and then you finally stitch it together. So editing is where, editing is how great creatives fool people into thinking that they do it effortlessly.
Yeah,
So
completely.
it's also true in video editing. Yeah.
Completely. And lastly, I think, and this is something that we've just touched upon a little bit, but like, oftentimes, gear aside, audio aside, everything aside, like just having confidence in your delivery, feeling prepared, or like you have something to say, or like you have substance worth talking about, is really worth a ton. And it's going to make you feel better, and therefore look better on camera as well.
Yeah.
And I think we come from somewhat different.
I was just gonna say
thinking, where like you are a huge preparer for video. I feel like I can get away, or I enjoy like a little bit less. But yeah, will you talk about why prep really helps you? You think?
Yeah, I mean I was gonna say I think like I've learned that this is again very similar to a familiar world here. It's kind of like a writing style. Um Meaning like there are different writing styles, prose styles, and it's the same with video. And I've definitely watched and have been impressed with like how you sort of will say, let's just let the conversation goes where it goes, and you pull the thread once you notice something interesting on the spot. And for me, I agree with that, and I've tried to like warm myself up more to that. I would say this episode is an example of like probably lighter prep work than we've
Yeah.
done versus other episodes. I think for me, like I'm not big on scripting, but I'm really big on like I would say mapping the conversation out. Like I would love to know when I sit down, like what we're going to start with, and then like kind of what we're going to end with,
Yeah.
and like along the way, just having some like milestone, maybe conversational points. Maybe that's the wrong word, but just sort of like stakes in the ground of like, hey, if this gets off topic or like if this gets off track, I know I can kind of immediately retreat to, this talking point, which is like definitely something we want to cover.
Hmm.
I think that has pros and cons. I think if you're going to address something that's a little bit more abstract, or it's something that you as a team are kind of figuring out as you go versus like, oh, we're just going to recap a project that we like strictly just did and like delivered something on. That you really don't need to prepare as much. But when we sort of like we're talking about dark social for the first time, we really wanted to kind of give a like state of the industry, and that involved kind of gathering a little bit of like external stuff like outside of our own experience. And that kind of stuff I can get tripped up on. Like I certainly
Hmm.
can kind of I can fumble over like, oh, did I mention that already, or does that even relate to this? Or I'll bring up an anecdote and it goes like wildly off course. So I think it really depends. I think it depends on the topic, and I think it depends on um how comfortable a person is with either style. Because I think a way that this works against you sometimes is I'll come up with like a sort of set of things I want to talk about for like a guest interview where I'm off, our show and on someone else's show. And then the host steers it in a totally different direction. And then I feel actually more off guard because like I
Yeah.
came ready and mentally kind of prepared to talk about a certain thing. And then the host hears me say something and now we're on to that. And I like the back of my mind is like, no, let's get back to like what I had planned, So it
Yeah.
can work against you. You do need to, I think, get comfortable with both, and then maybe just like the topic at hand can also kind of influence like how much prep you really feel you need.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think like no matter what, unless you're doing like true improv or something, like you've got to have an outline, you've got to have some talking points that you can rely upon. I think like what I would suggest, um, well, I guess I'll say first, sometimes I feel like especially newer people to video get a little
Hmm.
too deep in the trenches of scripting where um, for instance, they're making a video and you really, really, really want to stick to the script and you are saying something over and over again and you just can't get it. And maybe that's, sometimes that's just because it's a weird day and you are having trouble speaking. But sometimes it's
Hmm.
like the way you've scripted it actually isn't the best way to do it. And some
Yeah.
people, like, you have to have that flexibility um, to be able to talk about something that in a way that feels more natural, because oftentimes I feel like
Yeah.
you can't actually tell what feels natural until you're saying it out loud, um,
Hmm.
or trying to say it out loud and it's not working. And so I think that's like a good example of having sort of a mixture of preparation and being able to be flexible is making sure you know what you want to talk about, knowing the talking points so that if something comes up that doesn't feel right when you're recording it, you know how to correct it quickly and
Yeah.
naturally because you actually know what you're speaking about. Um,
Yep.
and yeah, so I think that amount of prep can be helpful, but also making sure that you're, making the content feel quick and relatable and natural,
Mhm.
and also like filled with personality. I think a lot of people, especially at brands, like think that everything has to be like bah humbug a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
And so I think like oftentimes not having a specific super strict script can help you pour a little bit more of your personality into things. So one thing I would like challenge people, especially who are new to video, is to maybe once in a while just get on video and talk about something with like very minimal script. And even
Mhm.
if you don't end up using the video, it's good practice
Yeah.
for the times when you might need to get off of the script and put a little more personality into things.
Yep. I would say two quick points on that is like number one, I think when you sort of do it live, so to speak, like when you make a sort of speech edit live or a script edit live, almost always you're making it more casual. I would say most people are not taking the script that they prepared beforehand and say this needs to sound like more authoritative or more strictly like matching our voice and tone. Usually, like you said, it looks great on paper, and then you say it out loud and you're like, I would never say this to someone in person, or it doesn't pass. There's a lot of
I
little
would
like
never listen to someone who says it like this. That's when
yeah,
it's worst.
yeah. And there's a lot of little tests out there of like, from marketing copy, which often gets overwritten, or just like, video scripts, which suffer from kind of the same fate of like the bar test. Like, would you say this to someone next to you at a bar if you were explaining it to them, that kind of thing. So usually I'll say that like when you're making kind of live edits, they almost always are more casual. I think the second thing to remember too is like, yes, like even, in this conversational style of video, I think this is like sort of obviously and definitely accepted. But even in more prepared style videos, I mean, I always think like how many people sit around and stay in a movie theater to watch like the blooper reel at the end. Like people like to see like a little bit more of like, oh, you're not this perfectly prepared like on script kind of brand all the time. I would say the way I would summarize it is like you don't have to be serious to be taken seriously. Like you don't always have to be
Yeah,
serious to be taken seriously.
completely.
So I think like it's great to kind of like get that in there. And it's really hard to write that into a script. Like great script writers who have written for video for quite a while, they can sometimes nail it, the first time within the first script that they send out to people. But a lot of times you find moments for like humor and like stuff that's like a little bit offbeat right there when you're recording. So I think that that's a great bit of advice too, is like, yes, you will probably end up like lightening up that script just a little bit when you finally do the shoot. And don't feel like you have to show up like and follow it so rigidly. It's really just like a guidepost.
Yeah,
So you know roughly what you're going to get into when you turn the camera on. Yeah.
completely. Yeah, definitely. And I think even, you know, us doing this show has helped us with that as well. Because, yeah, you have a script, but ultimately just kind of gotta yap away and see what comes out.
Yeah,
Um,
it's they often say like in writing drafts, like you don't know what you know until you try to write it down, which is this idea that like sometimes you don't really have the idea in hand until you try to unpack it and address it. And I think that that happens in conversations all the time. So of course it's going to happen when you're making video. Again, I even feel that that's true even when the video is a little bit more prepared. It's a little bit more like lights to the side, people in the room, camera on you. It still happens. It probably happens less than in like your average podcast, but I think if you're showing up, I think if you're expecting to show up with this like really rigid script and for the person to just like nail it with the right like tone and style that people are really going to warm up to, you're kind of dreaming. Like let the
Yeah.
person get some of their personality into it after you've like kind of set them up for success, you know?
totally. Yeah. And so hopefully with that, with all of this info, you're going to become a video expert. The next Casey Neistat, you're going to be huge. I think that's all
Yeah.
it takes.
Yeah. And I do want to like say it was I definitely appreciate, won't obviously like our customers won't name names here, but I do appreciate all of our customers that like shared this feedback. This came directly from our product team's convo with marketers, with our customers. And honestly, it takes to like a really strong, I think, self-awareness to actually say, like I think a reason that marketers would love to give would be something more business oriented, like, well, I don't know if I can prove the ROI, and we did hear that kind of stuff too, right? This like non-personal stuff, and so I give people a lot of credit when they're like willing to just say like, I am actually just worried about how I'm going to appear on camera. Like
Yeah.
it may be a sort of a personal risk to me if I show up and kind of sound awkward or silly, or I don't have anything to say, or just like strictly I have been such a behind the scenes person. I'm scared to be on camera.
Yeah.
I think that that's way more common than people realize, and I just want to give like, I guess the 2 points I'm trying to make here is, one, I really appreciate people sharing that, and two, like if that's how you're feeling and behind the scenes you're kind of given reasons like the ROI stuff, and really in your heart of hearts it's like, I'm just afraid to appear on camera, like you're not alone there. It's something we all have to kind of like address. But I think most people start from that place. I don't think most people start from a place of like, I'm more comfortable on camera than off, you know? So you got to get there eventually. Yeah. Maybe Jack.
Yeah,
Jack
no
is,
one.
he was
No,
born.
no way. No, I used to be terrible. But it takes time and practice,
Definitely.
like anything.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, yeah, really hope this is helpful. Let us know what you want us to talk about in future episodes, because we're always ears open. And thanks for watching. Come back next week. Greg, it's been real as usual. Happy Thanksgiving to all. And we'll talk to you next week.
Awesome. Take care.